On day 23, we'll be drawing our relationship map. This map is meant to offer you a high degree of predictability. Writing it while you're writing chapter 7 is now possible because your story is mature enough. This map will help you to revise the story you're actually writing and review its coherence, its consistency, and its global cohesion, and it will help you to have more clarity on your future stories. By predicting which new choice you're likely to make, by offering you a clear frame for comparison in the relationship between the character in each of your new stories. This map is a comparative tool, allowing you to track the evolution of the character roles you'll be using through your different stories. Now, we'll put the emphasis on roles here. Functions are meant to be useful. They are useful when you're writing your characters because they help you to understand point of view and change of perspective. But they'll never be as important as roles are when it comes to character's definition and character's identity. So when it will come to define the level of affinity between two characters, the behavior traits attached to a role and the behavior traits of the individual characters will be the defining factor of the affinity. Same for the potential alignment. The motivation of a character, so the motivation emerging from the character's role, will be a defining factor when it comes to alignment and the conjoined alignment of two characters, their likelihood to become aligned, to become part of the same organization. Since motivation is directly related to goal and interest, motivation, defined by the role, is an essential piece of information when it comes to defining the degree of attachment of two characters. And since the role defines the motivation and 2 out of 4 behavior traits, it will, in most cases, define the influence a character can have onto another. Now, we've talked about influence, influence like this in our previous lesson, the lesson on the second encore. And influence was defined through attachment. Influence was defined through the means of reaction. The attachment between two characters will suggest a future reaction that the character can have if one of them is in a dangerous situation, for example, or if one of them is supposedly in danger, threatened the other character, because she's attached to this first character, will react in a certain manner. And it will all be dependent on the situation and on the perspective of both characters on the situation, which will cause conflict. Now, as a starter, we'll get back to the 6th role we presented you previously, and we'll focus for now on the notions of affinity, alignment, and how they articulate with each other. Roles are defined by 2 main criteria: 2 behavior traits and 1 motivation. Roles aren't enough when it comes to creating characters' identity. If you want to create individuals, if you want to create characters in the sense which is accepted mostly, you'll need to add 2 additional behavior traits. It's what we'll do now. The roles presented here have a degree of complementarity which is directly dependent on proximity, meaning that the rival is, since she's closest from the arbiter and the leader, most likely to become attached to these two characters. She's more likely to create affinity with these two characters, and she's more likely to create establish an alignment with these two characters. So there's a direct codependency, a direct interdependency between these three roles. Same thing for the leader, closest from the rival and the enticer. So she's most likely to develop affinities and attach herself to these two roles, the two characters bearing these roles. But there's another kind of attachment to consider here. The rival, if you look at her behavior traits and her motivation, and the advisor, same remark, are complementary. These two roles oppose each other in a way which allows them to complement each other. So if these two characters, for example, the two characters bearing the role of rival and advisor, were antagonists, so for example, the rival is the protagonist and the advisor is the antagonist in your story, or the threat here, it would work. It would work quite well because these two characters would have opposite motivations, and the implementation, the execution of these motivation in the form of their goal would display just very well. They would find conflict quite easily because in their nature they're opposed. But in the same manner, or in the same continuity, if it's your choice, if ever the threat, the antagonist, chooses to join the protagonist later in the story, after chapter 6 for example, they could, and it's highly likely, help each other. They could help each other to correct each other's weaknesses, since they're both presenting what the other is lacking. The same logic is applicable for every pair, so leader and sponsor, or enticer and arbiter. And if you compare directly the function of these characters, you'll see quite fast that they would oppose each other. They would oppose each other because their inner workings, the way they see the environment, the way they see other individuals, are directly opposite, are not meant to block the story. These oppositions are meant to catalyze the story. Every time a pair of opposing role, a pair of character which is supposed to be antagonistic toward one another, is meeting one another, a new crisis can happen. And crises are your landmarks when it comes to rhythm. Crises are meant to accelerate the story, or to move the story forward at least. Now there's a third type of relationship that you can see here if we only consider roles. Characters bearing roles which are not directly adjacent to one another may be opposed as well, but may be opposed in a very different manner than characters which are directly opposites. For example, the arbiter and the advisor are opposed in their way to solve conflicts, where the advisor will look for the satisfaction of both parties. The arbiter will focus on solving the issue in a balanced manner. So it does not have to do, no, it's not her first objective, it's not to satisfy parties, it's to satisfy in a way the world. The arbiter wants to be equitable, she wants to minimize damages done to one party, the other party, and the environment itself. So here's our three type of relationship. Direct adjacence, direct opposition, and relative opposition. Subsequently to roles, there are two more layers we want to consider when it comes to creating characters. One of those is profiles. Profiles is especially useful when it comes to creating secondary or tertiary characters. Now, profiles can be directly articulated with roles. For example, a rival character is likely to be a strength-oriented character. She may also be a speed-oriented character. That's the most likely profiles for a rival character. When it comes to an advisor type of character, most likely to be between agility and between speed. The same logic applies for all 6 roles, and you do not necessarily have to align the role with the profile which is in the same color. You can have an arbiter which is directly which is a speed-oriented profile. You cannot have that. In order to create more diversity, in order to create a more surprising, more unusual profile, you can have a rival which is more agility-oriented, rather than strength-oriented. These profiles are transcribed directly through visual information. Now, if you've seen the whole course on visual representation, you remember that each of these profiles has a direct visual representation, and you can make use of that. You can make use of each of these silhouettes in order to create your character and attribute her a role. For example, this would be an arbiter, this would be an advisor, this would be a sponsor, for example. But you can really turn this, or even this, into a rival, because the silhouette is only a part of the information. It's the visual information is only the first layer of information you delivering on your character. So if your character has to be a rival, for example, she can have any of these shapes, and you may even want to choose the shape which is more likely to surprise the public or to surprise the other characters. And once you've written your first story and you tested all these character designs, all these visual profile, you may want to reuse them, but for different roles in the next story in order to create surprise. It's just an easy way to put your twist on a specific role, on a specific function, on a specific profile, by combining them, recombining them, mix and match in order to create more surprise in the long run. Now, the third layer is the origins of the character. Where does the character come from? But also, where does the character want to live? Which places, which locations in this world does your character want to visit? Does she want to live into them just for a temporary period, or does she want to have a lifelong relationship with this specific location, this specific setting, this specific environment? The place, the location from which your character is coming from is crucial. You do not always have to display it. You do not always have to mention where the character is coming from, but you always have to know where it is. Even if you're never writing it in your story, even if you're not even suggesting where she can come from, you want to know where, because you want to know how your character will perceive her environment through the whole story. So let's return to our two main questions when it comes to character development and dialoguing with your character. What does your character want, and what does your character need? These two questions will be asked to your character and by your character to herself as she evolves through new territories. Your world map may now be fully completed, or it might be only mildly completed, depending on the level of details you've needed for this story. You may have already indicated which kind of resources which each area, each zone possesses, which kind of function, which kind of role does each of these areas fulfill, which kinds of need does each area respond to, and subsequently, which kind of organization administrates each area. So you may know which kind of people are living in each area, and you may know, for example, if the people living in the area in red are opposed to the people living in the area in blue. Knowing that, in some cases, in some locations, since your map is a progressive map, you have these kind of location, this island in the very middle of the map, which has a part of blue, part of red, and a part of green, which indicates that this territory, this small territory, is meant to be shared between different people. So what does it mean in terms of character creation? Well, if your character is coming from, for example, from the top corner of the map, the top right corner of the map, in the mountain, the mines, in fact, the mine site, she will not have the same relationships with other character. She will not have the same way to relate with other character than a character which has grown on this island, which was separated between three kinds of people. Same remark at a more regional level, at a more local level. If your character has grown on this small island, which is right next to the larger land here, she may not have the same relationship as the people of the larger body of land have with other people, because you see this small island is more isolated. It's one of the few islands in the archipelago which is fully blue. So you may imagine that only people of this world are living here. They do not have to share. And since it's a smaller community, you may imagine that it's a more enclosed community, a more restrictive community, maybe you may say. And that comes, that's about origins. But now, what about occupations? What if someone living in the industrial quarter, in the industrial area? What about her relationship with someone who's a trader in the same area and does not have maybe the same kind of privilege, the same kind of status, if that's something you want to implement in your world? What about the people which are living right here in this more restrictive quarter, which is maybe not accessible to people of either of these groups? Now we've done interactions, we've done occupation. What about interests? What if your character was born in the zone in green? Now, what if she was born in this large zone, which is a giant leisure park? Hence the giant floating spheres. Now, this place in green is a giant garden of floating spheres. It's a very peculiar place compared to the rest of the world, which is mainly built on earth, mainly built on islands, mountains, wastelands. This is a garden of floating spheres. So you may imagine that someone coming from this place will have a different vision of the world than someone coming from any of the other three places. But not only because of the land sharing, not only because of the land she's grown, but Also because she has grown, this character has grown into a place which was dedicated to entertainment. So she may have had more time to develop her interest. She may have had more time to develop her goal, or her propension to find goals, her propension to develop her motivation, to develop maybe her healthier habits, to develop certain traits, certain aspects of their personality, which are only accessible in this place originally. So that's the third layer that we'll be using: character's origins.